If you're using Chat GPT to write your college essays, there's a pretty good chance it's much more obvious than you think. Hey everybody, my name is Steven. I'm from Allan Admissions, and today we're reviewing a Reddit post. It's written by Stern of BGZ Consulting, and it's titled, "In the past 3 days, I've reviewed over 100 essays from the 2024-2025 college admissions cycle. Here's how I could tell which ones were written by Chat GPT." Now, this is something that I've long had an interest in. It's very evident to me when I read an essay that has been written by ChatGPT, but it's something that I've always wondered, is it just because I've had experience with this? Is it because ChatGPT at the time wasn't very advanced? Well, this post was written within the last month, and in that regard, I find it very informative and very insightful, and I think it's worth discussing some of the highlights here. I'll share a link in the description to the actual full post. This video is just hitting some of the highlights, but it's really worth reading in full to understand the limitations of ChatGPT, especially as it relates to your admissions essay. So let's dive into some of the highlights here. So to start with, Ben writes, quote, "In the past, I've praised ChatGPT's writing ability, especially for college admissions essays, but it has a limited conception of what makes for a good essay, and with an uncreative prompt, it tends to make a, quote, safe choice, which is often cliched. As I frequently emphasize, context is important. Your essays do not exist in a vacuum, but among the hundreds of thousands or even millions of essays out there. That's why having a, quote, good essay is not enough." I couldn't say it better myself, especially if you're applying to the Ivy League schools. We're not looking to write an essay that's safe or that's comfortable or that just looks like the rest of them. We want to take some risks. We want to push ourselves beyond what we do. And the antidote to that, to me, is in the details. Providing details about a particular activity, a particular experience, is how you distinguish yourself from the other applicants. And the important thing, too, as it relates to ChatGPT, is that these details are often not things that you have published or that ChatGPT would be able to scrape from information sources other places. Why? Because a lot of times those details superficially may not seem much. For example, if you're at a quiz bowl or a debate competition, it might be a glance from your teacher, the way he or she looks at you, that can either set you off or give you confidence. And that particular look, it's not going to show up on your resume or your activities list. It's not going to show up in a news article or a press release about your quiz bowl, Olympiad, competition results. But it's something so essential to the story about why that event was so meaningful to you that to not write about it would be doing a disservice to your essay. ChatGPT could never produce that, and if it does, it's going to sound very cliche and, as Ben wrote here, safe. So in that regard, this is a very good point. If you use ChatGPT, you're going to play it safe, but safe is not going to get you into the top tier schools that you're going for. The next thing that I want to highlight here, Ben talks about ChatGPT with metaphors, and he writes, quote, "It's mind-blowing that ChatGPT can understand and generate sensical metaphors. It's one of the most significant achievements in AI to date, but the metaphor it uses are usually not very original." And this is going back to the idea that ChatGPT tends to play it safe. Ben uses a couple of examples here about weaving and cooking, and that might be useful if your essay is about cooking or weaving itself. But if your essay is about, say, caring for animals or a trip you took to New Zealand and you compare it to cooking a new dish, well, that's a very common thing, and it's not especially relevant to you as an individual. Yes, in an abstract, it might be good, but college admissions readers are not looking at you in the abstract. They're looking at you in the context of your entire application. We want everything to be connected, intentional, and purposeful. So if you're going to use metaphors, we want them to be exactly that, intentional, purposeful for what you're writing about. To just use the cliche, it was like a big sports game, it was like cooking a dish, it was like weaving a thread, you're just going to sound like every other writer in there. Then he touches upon an interesting one. He talks about tricolons, and tricolons is something that I particularly use a lot. Ben here writes, "A tricolon is a rhetorical device involving three parts. I'm not going to go into detail about the history, but they're particularly prevalent in literature from all around the world. Famous examples include," and he uses Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, stop, drop, and roll, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, something I want to touch on here, he's absolutely right. Tricolons are very common, but the automatic use of things like metaphors, like tricolons, does not automatically mean that an admissions officer at Harvard, at Duke, at UC Berkeley is automatically going to assume you're using AI. Like the rest of things, it's going to be done in the context of your larger overall essay. If you use something that is very authentically you and you use a tricolon, no, they're not going to think, oh, he absolutely used Chat GPT. But on the other hand, if the vocabulary is generic, if the metaphors, as we said before, are generic, if the writing just seems very safe and then we hit this tricolon, the admissions officer might go, it seems like she wrote this using Chat GPT, or at the very least, ask Chat GPT to fill in the blanks. Context matters. Ben hits on this. I always hit on it with my students. One thing in isolation does not automatically put you in the bucket of AI. It does not automatically make you safe. Same thing here. I love tricolons. I use them in all my fiction writing. I use them for my reflective writing, but I don't actually use ChatGPT for most of my writing. Now, it's my background, so it makes sense that I wouldn't use it. But even if I did use AI extensively, tricolons does not automatically mean, oh, this was absolutely AI generated. So then two more points that he hits upon here I want to discuss. The first, quote, I verbed that the true meaning of X is not only Y, it's also Z. And also, quote, as I synonym for advance in my education, I will synonym for carry or incorporate this lessener value. I see this all the time, and it might be the strongest giveaway that ChatGPT has gotten involved. Why? Because it's the most generic conclusion that you can possibly use to summarize your essay. The best essays, the close, they circle back to something from the beginning. But to circle back to something from the beginning, they need the context of what the essay started with. ChatGPT is getting better at this, to be sure, but it's not always self-referential. And in this regard, what's the safest way to close out an essay? Well, the safest way is to say, through this experience, I learned X, or as I advance to college, I will take Y from this particular experience. But like we said at the beginning of this video, we don't want to play it safe. There's practically no student in the US that can afford to play it safe if they're applying to the Ivy Leagues, to Duke, to Stanford, that type of thing. You need to take a little bit of risk. You need to be creative with your conclusions, and to just fall back on these stock sentences, these stock conclusions. It may not, again, automatically tell me that you use AI, but at the very least, it tells me that you didn't put much thought into your conclusion. And at worst, as Ben writes here, it's a pretty strong hint that you might have used AI in your essay. Now, one of the absolute most important points that Ben writes about in his post is one that I'm going to address here, and it's the idea of AI checkers not being accurate. He writes, one of the students whose essays I reviewed admitted he used Chat GPT, but he wasn't worried because he ran it through several AI detectors and they came up with low percentages. Yeah, I could tell right away, and I bet most admission officers could as well. I don't claim to be better than any particular AI detector, but I do caution students and universities about relying on them. Reading is an intuitive process, and admissions officers, as well as professional counselors, have a large data set of their own they've trained on, in particular essays from students of similar backgrounds. ChatGPT's data set likely doesn't have a lot of demographic data about the authors of particular essays it's trained on. I cannot emphasize this point enough. Just because you get an AI checker that claims there's only a 10% chance that this was AI does not automatically assume that admissions officers with a dozen plus years of experience, that private counselors with a decade plus of experience, that universities who know how students of certain backgrounds tend to write and students of certain educational experience tend to write, they are better at figuring it out than ChatGPT's checkers will be. Now, yes, there's always the possibility that you can use AI, you can edit it, you can refine it in a manner that sneaks by the admissions officers. But these checkers for AI are often just treating things in the vacuum. They may only be looking at vocabulary, sentence structure, that sort of thing. They're probably not taking into context what's your academic background? What do your activities suggest about your writing capabilities? What is your educational journey in terms of the high schools you've gone to and the summer programs you've enrolled in suggest about your writing capabilities? What do the rest of the essays suggest in terms of your writing capabilities? So, in a vacuum, yes, an essay written by Chat GPT may pass an AI checker with flying colors. But college admissions officers are trained for this particular type of writing in this particular context of admissions. And in that regard, I would never trust an AI checker to tell me if something can pass the sniff test with admissions officers. At this point, I would just assume that if you've written it with ChatGPT, even with the help of ChatGPT, someone in admissions is going to figure it out. It may not be at every school, but someone is going to learn, and at that school, boy, you're facing a real uphill battle at that point. So again, I would highly encourage you to go look at this Reddit post. Again, I've posted screenshots. I'll post a link in the below. But this post is so important to me to get across the dangers of using ChatGPT and why it's probably not as subtle as you think it is. Now, what are the big takeaways from this? Well, to me, the first one is it's more important than ever to take creative risks. Yes, the definition of risk means that there's downside, but if you work early enough in advance, if you solicit enough feedback, you mitigate the downside of the risk, and you get the upside that you could have an incredibly compelling and unique essay. It will, if you do it right from your content, from your structure, and from the style in which you write, there's going to be zero chance that admissions officers are going to think that you wrote with AI because you didn't. And even better, and more importantly, you're going to stand out from the people who either used AI or who didn't use AI but played it safe and therefore look like the ones who used AI. So please take your time, work in advance, and take some creative risks. That doesn't mean if you get an essay about why do you want to attend this university, you write a poem that's gibberish and ultimately doesn't answer the question. That's the downside part of risk where you're going too far in the other direction. But be willing to do a little bit of research. Be willing to take a creative structure so long as you're still providing the relevant information for the schools in question. The second big takeaway related to the first one is that as long as you use ChatGPT, you're going to get a quote, play it safe answer, because that's what ChatGPT is played on. The vast majority of us, when we write something, we play it safe, we play it straightforward. Well, why? Because there's not a lot of value in taking a big risk. If you're writing an email to a professor, if you have to write a 100-word description of a book, there's really not a lot of value in taking a huge risk. And in that regard, ChatGPT has a lot of value because it can quickly fill out a play it safe answer and give us the relevant information. For college essays, however, the stakes are extremely high and you can't afford to play it safe. ChatGPT, by definition, and by the way it's programmed, will play it safe. So as long as you're doing that, understand that you're going to have to do a whole lot of editing to the point that you might as well just write it yourself. And the last point I want to give, and this is something that I know you could have been watching this video and now be stressing about, the use of some of the things that Ben talks about does not automatically mean that admissions officers are going to assume you wrote this with AI. Ben has a lot of comments in the thread that addresses this, but the use of quote unquote cliche metaphors, of tricolons, of conclusion sentences that follow the same structure, it does not automatically put you in the bucket of student who used AI and gets rejected. But again, we want to think about things in the larger context. Do most of your essays sound like they came from an authentic place and they just happen to have a metaphor about weaving in there? Or do most of your essays come across very generic and very cliche and just have one thing on top of another? Are you a student that has a strong creative writing background and all of a sudden, because of a time crunch, your essays sound very generic? Or are you a student that has that extensive creative writing background, but to maximize your use, everything you do is in a tricolon structure, whether within a sentence or a paragraph? Context matters. That's the big takeaway. It's not something that at the moment ChatGPT can capture. And in that regard, I would highly encourage you, if you're going to use ChatGPT, use it to generate ideas, use it to create a schedule for working on your essays, but don't use it to write your actual essays. College admissions officers are smart. They're going to pick up if you have. And for all of the reasons that Ben outlined in this post, I would never do it. That's it for the video, everybody. If you have any questions about this topic, let me know. We'll put the link in the description. Thank you again for watching. We'll see you around.